Welcome to the Equity Teacher Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Rachael Mahmood. In this podcast, we'll dive into the stories, the voices, and the expertise of incredible teacher leaders who are making a difference through the equity work they do in their classrooms and their communities. Welcome back to another episode of Equity Teacher Leader. I'm super excited to have Deshaun Washington, Dr. Deshaun Washington. I feel like the first time we connected over LinkedIn, that doctor wasn't there yet.
It wasn't Dr. Mahmood. It wasn't yet. I think I was probably in my last semester or so. So I'm like, yeah, now in the doctor community.
Amazing. I am super psyched because this is our first time talking in person, but we have chatted over LinkedIn. We've hyped each other's posts up and each other's work, and you're doing some great things. And I'm really excited to jump into that conversation today. But before we do that, why don't you just take a minute to introduce yourself to our audience?
Dr. Deshaun Washington, graduated with my doctorate at Vanderbilt University, K-12 Education Leadership and Policy. I'm an educator by heart, been an elementary teacher for over 10 years between Boston Public Schools and Lexington Public Schools. I taught second grade, third grade, fourth grade. Currently a professor and also the founder of Cultivating Changemakers, which we will dive a lot into today. Sure.
Absolutely. And I'm really excited to talk to you about Changemakers. That is definitely going to be the focus of this podcast. I think you might have forgotten a few other things like 2024 Massachusetts Teacher of the Year, TEDx speaker. I met up with your 2025 Massachusetts Teacher of the Year, and she was like, "What? You're interviewing Deshaun? He wrote some children's books." So we got to talk about that as well. So many amazing credentials, 100% an equity-focused teacher leader here. Let's get into the topic of this podcast. What caught my eye when I was scrolling through my LinkedIn one day, and I'm looking at all these amazing educational leaders, and I saw your Changemakers post about all the work you've been doing around financial literacy, social justice, educational equity. And I'd love for you to share just what's your story of how you came to this intersection of social justice, educational equity, and financial literacy?
Okay, so when I was in college, in undergrad here in Boston, I actually studied accounting and finance as my major. And I actually entered the accounting firm at the time and was working in the tax department. And I didn't really like the whole accounting, finance. It wasn't really for me. Made a lot of good money, but it wasn't really my style. And there was a program called Junior Achievement, which helped to teach young people about financial literacy. It was my introduction or re-entry, I should say, into the world of education, but this time as an educator teaching young people. And young people was just having light bulb moments when we're talking about checking accounts, savings accounts, building a business, investing. Kids were making all of these connections. So it got me to leave the accounting firm that I was at and, go back to school so I could become a licensed educator. Taught elementary school for over 10 years, as I mentioned before. And one day during the school year 2024, 2025, my students asked me, they were like, "Hey, Mr. Washington, you think you can give us a lesson about how to make money?" And I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely. I could certainly bring a financial analyst to come to the classroom." And so I did. And kids did these simulations when they were able to purchase stocks, and they'd be able to look at how the prices were going up and down based on scenarios. And they were just wowed by the nuances of the world of finance and financial literacy. And I remember taking a look out into the pod area where my classroom area was. So I was teaching fourth grade at the time, and it was 4 other fourth grade classrooms outside of mine. And I took a look and noticed that none of them were learning about finance on that particular day. So I'm like, man, they're missing out on a lot of cool information today. I did some research and found that actually in Massachusetts, only about 10% of all the children in Mass actually have financial literacy classes. And in fact, the overwhelming majority will never learn about financial literacy at all in any of their K-12 experiences. So I saw that to be interesting because we use money all the time. to pay our mortgage, to pay the light bill, to be able to make investments or start a business. So I'm like, okay, there needs to be something that provides education for young people to understand about finance. And that's when Cultivating Changemakers really started to focus itself on this idea of financial literacy. We spent a lot of time between writing children's books, creating a 156 lesson curriculum for K-12, where every year there will be 12 lessons that kids will learn about financial literacy that's age appropriate, and it just gets them in the conversation about money. And we started with kindergarten because the research actually shows that 4-year-old children actually already formed opinions about money.
100%.
Yes, like they already hear their family, their parents talk about money, whether it's good or not good, and it forms how their relationship with money ends up being. So that way, when they enter society, to be an informed consumer, a critical consumer, and one who's civically engaged, they're able to utilize the skill sets that comes with financial literacy and the durable life skills to make impact.
That's amazing. And I definitely get you. I remember when my son was like around 4 or 5 years old, he was like, I'm going to go outside and I want to start a stand. And he was collecting like sticks and he was like taping them together into little bundles. And then he had like little plastic bags and he was filling with pine needles from the backyard. And he said to me, I'm going to sell firewood and fire starter out in the front yard. And I was like, boy, you're going to learn something about supply and demand in our neighborhood today. Like nobody wants to buy your sticks for firewood and nobody wants to buy your bags of pine needles for fire starter. And it was so funny, but he was so determined when he went out there. He set up his little like table and everything. And I was like, okay, let's just see what happens. Let's just, but what I underestimated was the marketing effectiveness of cuteness, right? And the belief in the adults in our neighborhood to support kids who are interested in this entrepreneurship. And he has not changed. He has taken everything from his old shoes to try to sell them outside to lemonade to now he's got a garbage can washing business as a young teen. He's thinking about it all the time. And kids are. And so many of our conversations we have with kids are around like, we don't have the money for that, or you need to budget for that, or that's something you can save for.
And that's the deal, right? It's like, for your son, for example, the soft skills of like creating a vision, imagining a vision of what a business owner looks like, and being able to market your business so that people are interested in it and believing in your business is something that really funnels through all the way in through adulthood, right? And so the skill sets that you need to market and have charisma to build your brand up, and then the ability to track your success through sales and through the expenses that led to those sales is really incredible. And so that's what we're trying to teach many young people all around Massachusetts and beyond. It's those same skills that your son's demonstrated.
And I saw that a little bit too. For the last 10 years, I'd worked in a Title I building and so many conversations around money and so many kids talking about, like all these things they want to have in life. And then when you ask them, okay, well, how are you going to get there? Right? Like, what's the job you're looking at and things like that. And then like them not even knowing like, well, how much money does a job like that actually make? And are those real things that you can have if you have that job? So I was teaching fifth grade at the time. And I used to also think of financial literacy as an educational tool that we can use for more educational equity, right? Giving all students the opportunities to have discussions about the job market, talk about needs and wants and all of those things as well.
And it's just to think, like, we wrote children's books. So books like Cece's Money Seeds is like an example of the needs and wants conversation that you're having with your fifth graders. Cece, the main character, wrestles with this idea of she wants one thing, these shiny stickers, but she needs the gardening mittens so that way she can help her grandmother with gardening. They really like, how does this thing relate to my life? Well, financial literacy relates to your life because you are living it every day in your circumstances. And you will be living it even more so when you're the head of the household or when you are in the home that you're serving with your family and you're maintaining a roof over the head. These skill sets are lifelong. And so that's where education, I think, is really trying to move. Right now, we have 30 states in the country that has financial literacy as a graduation requirement for high school. My state, Massachusetts, is not one of them currently. And
only, again, less than 10% of kids are having a required class on financial literacy. So the overwhelming majority are going through their whole schooling experience, never having these durable life skills of collaboration, critical thinking, the mental fortitude to be able to build multiple businesses and seeing those things out. It's just not practicing those skills. And so, then they go out in the world and now we're expecting them to do that thing, and debt reoccurs itself, right? And it
Who does
works out.
that protect? Who does
Right.
that protect when our students, when our families, when our citizens are in constant debt? And that is a huge equity issue. I just, want to touch on that. I always think it's crazy how like our high school requirements, like you have to take geometry, you have to take trigonometry, but you don't have to take parenting. You don't have to take financial literacy, like things that you're more likely to do in your life than
Right.
use trigonometry, right? And
Absolutely. Absolutely.
um,
Like to your point on debt. So like I've really studied like this concept of debt and the where it really flows in this country. So like if you really pay attention, like your debt starts at the government level, right? So the federal government is operating under debt. They get to reprint money over and over and over again. So they're never defaulting, but they're in debt. And so people are in the country are observing debt at the highest level. And that's funneling down to businesses. More than half of all of our businesses in the country are in the red. It's barely surviving on a month to month. And then you funnel down even more so that goes into communities and that goes into the homes. Like, so we see that debt's really in the forefront of this capitalist society. And that's not good. And a part of it is because we've relied so much on just going check to check. We haven't really been able to liberate to begin to see like how we could really funnel our funds in a different way to pay off our debts, but then also to start investing in ourselves through the stock market or through a business or through financial services like life insurance that we can start to utilize to build up wealth in our community, in our home over the course of time.
yeah. And who benefits when the working class people are in debt and have to pay interest on that debt and can't dig themselves out of that debt? Our credit card companies get richer, our general everyday working public get poorer. That gap
Absolutely.
grows. So I really like your article that you wrote, Financial Literacy is a Civil Right and a Civic Responsibility. So I'm thinking about financial literacy as this great equity force in our educational system to help leverage some of that social injustice. Tell us a little bit more about like financial literacy as a civil right and a civic responsibility. I really enjoyed the wording that you chose there and just the points that you were hitting in those articles.
Every child going to a public school in America is accessing on investing and on budgeting and on taxes and on the racial discrimination of finance and how to build a legacy of finance. It really should be covered in it at the minimum semester long, because we are bringing up people that, if we are wise as a country, I would be pouring into your children today. And I will be investing in their financial well-being, because their well-being benefits our entire community, because they will be able to make moves to purchase homes later, be able to make moves to start businesses later, and not have to rely on taking on hundreds of thousands of dollars
Yeah.
alone somewhere. They will be able to do economic mobility in our community because they have the background tools for financial literacy. And I think that's like the big part of the civil right piece that comes out of it. The justice piece is that we're not investing in our community financially in that sort of way to build financially literate people that eradicate debt and be able to build up towards literacy, freedom, liberation through the understanding of the base level tools of financial literacy. I think is required for everybody. Yet we haven't done that. And I think part of that responsibility means that for a lot of us, we are also struggling with financial literacy, right? I spoke to a lot of teachers and been speaking to a lot of educators, and they're like, listen, I need a financial literacy course. No, never mind the kid. Like, I need one of these. And the reason why is because like we haven't been taught financial literacy in school. The majority of us, and the few that have gotten it that I've been speaking to over the last year, they're like, well, I got it because I wasn't good at math. So they threw me in a personal finance class so like you could get this last credit. And I'm like, oh, this was the most important class I ever had in high school. And it helped me to be who I am today in college and beyond. And so it's a responsibility to give everyone that sort of access, but it requires us to be able to empower our adult learners, our educators, our teachers to also be able to begin to have access to what financial literacy look like in our own lives.
And if we think of it as a civic responsibility, right, then we should be teaching it in our schools because that's where we're growing our community, our future community members, right? If we think of it as a civic responsibility, then our government and our businesses shouldn't be hiding from the everyday working class and the everyday citizens how to perpetuate their own wealth or how to grow their wealth. It shouldn't be like a secret that is only privileged to certain classes of people or certain groups of people, or if your parents know how to do it, they'll pass that knowledge on to you. I think when we think of something as a civic responsibility, it means it's for our entire community to hold that knowledge. And I love thinking about like how you said it's a civil right too, because it's not just for a few people. It's not just for children of wealthy people to learn these tools. I remember somebody said to me, put in an IRA when you turn 18, max out your contributions for 5 to some number of years. And they're like, by the time you're in your 40s, you'll be like a millionaire. And I was like, what? Like, why did anyone tell me that when I was 18? Right?
The power of knowledge, the power of wisdom is priceless. You're able to gain a little bit of wisdom and then be able to spread that out into your daily life. Is the return on investment for education in this sort of way, financial literacy. I mean, like the return on investment is tenfold. Not only are you able to now begin to make wiser decisions, but now you're able to begin the economic mobility that comes along with it. And that helps to build generation wealth. Another tool is life insurance. A lot of people think of life insurance as death insurance, right? They think of it as like, so-and-so is about to pass away. I get them the life insurance. But life insurance is one of those great investment tools when you do it the right way, because it builds up cash value. And it's one of the only tools that you have tax-free investment put in and tax-free coming out. And a lot of our wealthy families, a lot of our wealthy people in this country, they have life insurance. Not only do they have it, the spouse has it. Not only do they have it, the children have it. As soon as they are born, get them that life insurance. So that way it could continue to build a ton of wealth over the course of time. And so those types of knowledge base, we have to, at the minimum, provide that knowledge of what these tools are for our community, for the economic mobility for adults, and also for the financial literacy piece for the younger folks. These are things that people like, oh, I didn't even know it does all that. I only used it for this thing. And it's like, yes, it is for that, but it's also an investment for yourself and for your family. And it is what generational wealth is being brought in. If you make a lot of money, you owe someone money. Creditors just go and snatch your money up. That life insurance policy actually protects your money, and it goes to the people that needs to go to the beneficiaries. These are the things like these rich and wealthy people are already thinking about and already doing before the child is even born. We already got this thing already set up for them. It's the same thing, but we got to make sure that we are starting to think about finances in that sort of way, generationally, so that way we could begin that liberation walk. That's
Wow.
civil rights. That is.
No, that's very powerful message. Well, thinking about all of this and, this being a podcast focused on helping our teacher leaders to build that social justice in their classroom, to center more things on educational equity, basically teaching financial literacy is a way to be an equity leader in your classroom. And I was a fifth grade teacher. I remember I created this unit and it was about the economy. And I couldn't do it the whole day because it would have been overwhelming for me. But I had my guided reading group of students and they weren't like doing the independent work while I was teaching my guided reading groups, right? So I was like, okay, I'm going to pay you to do your guided reading work. And printed a bunch of school money. And then I was like, oh, the kids can have different jobs. So like I had some kids that were like the landlords and they like collected the rent from the desks that everyone sat in. And then some people were utilities. And at the end of the week, they would collect. The kids are like, well, I didn't use anything. I'm like, did you turn the lights on? Did you go to the bathroom? Did you get a drink of water? I'm like, you have to pay for that. And the kids are like, what? They were so excited to make money on like doing their work during guided reading, but then the utilities person would come by and like collect their utilities, and the landlord would come by and collect their rent. And so we had like the different jobs, and some people worked at the store where kids could spend their money on things that they wanted. And then we had the banker, and the banker would hold on to your money for you so you wouldn't lose it. But if you gave the banker your money, then they would get like a interest bump on their money. And then we did this for 4 weeks, where the kids would pay all their bills, and then they would shop for things they wanted, like to sit in the fun chair, stuff like that. And then some kids, they just decide to put their money in the bank every week, and they would get some interest. And then the last week, it was so interesting because the kids got really excited. As some kids were like, it's like trying to figure out what they could spend, but the kids would put the money in the bank. They had like way more money to spend. And everybody's like, how'd you get so much money? And I just remember we only did it for a month because it was overwhelming to like remember to pay the kids and like to run the store every Friday and all this stuff. But we also did different jobs, and they would get paid for their jobs. Like some kids put the chairs up, and some kids collected the money at the end of the week, and people got paid different amounts for their little jobs on top of it. And they loved that unit. And I remember that in guided reading, we read news ELA articles on like redlining, and we read the Finance 101 book for kids on how to save money and needs and wants and all those things. And so I was pulling different financial literacy articles for them and things like that. And it was fun for me, and it was fun for them. Do you have some other ideas of things that educators can do if they want to get started with?
Absolutely. Yeah, your example is a fantastic one. My class have done alligator bucks, and we do it throughout the course of the year. And for the alligator bucks, it was essentially the same thing, except that, we would do stores like once a quarter. One thing that I've done in the past was raise money for a school field trip or a class field trip. And so we would find out what would the cost be for us to go on a school trip to like the museum or something like that. And rather than like, just go straight to family to pay, they'll sign a permission slip. But then what we'll do is we'll have a fundraiser to raise money towards the field trip. And then some of those things might be the bake sale scenario, a book sale where kids whose books, like they're now kind of grown out of the books, they'll sell it for a couple of dollars, and it will all go into like a large pot, which will then be used to calculate, how much closer we are. And then we also look for donations on top of that. And so the kids learned a lot about organization. What's the purpose of money? And that scenario was like, we're saving for a museum trip, and there was a responsibility that came along with it. To have like treasurers and to have people who are contributing by selling goods or selling their books that really made the experience worthwhile at a more individual level or academic level. You brought up the Newsella, and I think that's similar to that. You could have like in guided reading, if you do like RAS Kids or, Scholastics or whatever, the guided reading text that you're using at your school, you could focus on some of the financial literacy and the literacy blocks, and they can write about some of the topics that they learn in financial literacy. You can also do this in mathematics class where instead of having it just as a math problem, you're really constructing more of the strategy for solving a financial issue and using best strategies to go about that issue and what that could possibly look like for kids to defend their mathematical thinking through the lens of finances.
What would be like a financial task that they could do?
Yeah, I mean, it could just be as simple as the school was raising $1,000 towards the end of the year field day. And currently we have $300. There are multiple ways in which we could build our funds up towards that other $700. And so there's some options that are there. What can we do to raise the $700? For example, we could go buy art, but then there's also artists in the classroom. Well, we could do it ourselves and save money by creating the signs and the posters necessary to design the field day rather than going and buying a bunch of stuff. So we save money on that end. In terms of the sporting equipment, well, we can ask the gym teacher, can we borrow the equipment for the day rather than going and buying for the field day brand new material that we're only going to use one time. We can create new games rather than bringing in games from the store or what have you. And the way that we could create these games, I could teach you games that you could play with just one singular ball,
So
So
basically,
the
they're
idea.
like creating a budget and then like analyzing different ways.
Yes, and so one of the ways would be buying all these things, but another way would be like, "Hey, could we save a bunch of money, teach you how to do these games?"
Mm,
And so now you have the money on the back end that could go into things like food for the day. The whole school's getting a pizza brought in, an ice cream truck comes by to that
right,
every
right.
kid could get a scoop of ice cream. What I'm saying, like that wasn't available if we would have decided that we're gonna spend on these games. So you get the young kids to start thinking about, well, how do you utilize your gifts and your talents and being able to showcase that to them, how we can leverage those available resources in front of us to do it ourselves, a series of real life mathematical scenarios that is requiring collaboration, requiring critical thinking, requiring all these durable skills, right? To
Mm.
do math, really to do financial literacy and to do liberation work at the same time.
Got it. So you can create a token economy in your classroom. You can create like a budget task or like a mathematical task that, students can go through. Okay, what other ideas do you have for how we can integrate more financial literacy? Because maybe some schools, like you said, 30 states have financial literacy curriculums. Some don't. Like we have financial literacy standards, but our school district has never handed us like a unit and said, this is your financial literacy unit to hit the state standards. But they're like, financial literacy is like built in through our social studies text. But sometimes we don't get to that chapter, right? Because it's like often at the end of the
Right.
book, right? And we know we barely
This
got time for social studies. Getting to the end of the social studies book is like a dream.
Well, I think that's the double-edged sword of financial literacy
Yeah,
is that it fits into all the subjects, yet it's not enough if it just has like a little cameo appearance in each of these subjects. It's becoming that subject area that we need to touch upon. The demand is really high. This
right.
time the demand is kids are saying, I need to know this thing about how to manage money and what money is and how to use money. The educators are like, we need this because it's clear that our young folks going out into society illiterate in financial literacy and are reoccurring into this thing of debt. The workforce is saying, hey, we need young people to be able to understand financial literacy because we're bringing on people who have poor credit scores and they're making poor decisions with their money. So we need to give young people and adults content on financial literacy, and not just like teaching of like a lecture, but like the simulations, the showcases. And that's why this work is very important for us. And so I guess to bring it all together, financial literacy must have as its own, even though it can be integrated across subject areas. We're only saying 12 lessons a year, kindergarten to 12th grade. This could be A B schedule of SEL and throughout K to 12, even in the middle high school grades nowadays, there's an SEL block.
I really think you
It's
hit on
definitely.
like the intentionality, whether it's 12 times a year or 6 times a year or whatever it is, we need to be more intentional in making sure
Mhm.
that we're teaching it. That means planning it, not waiting until like our curriculum covers it, but really looking for those resources ahead of time. And I know you want to show us one of your resources that you made because you have a couple books there and we want to see them so we can look for them and use them. So what do you got there?
Yeah, so on Amazon, you can find the CC Money series. This is the first book, which is CC's Money Seeds. And this book is really about CC, our main character. She's learning from her grandmother, Grandma Penny, all about what it means to understand needs and wants. It goes back to our earlier conversation where we talked about understanding the differences between what is a need, what we need versus what we want to buy and what we want to spend. And Cece has to wrestle with those things. Then throughout the series, she learns with her grandmother, then later with her friends, various topics. Learn about fundraising and donating. She learns about budgeting. She learns about what it means to save and to give generously. And these concepts are baseline fundamentals for the earlier grades. And because again, the research shows that young people are already forming their opinions about money. But more importantly, when we give young people early and often financial literacy education, it leads them to be earners of over $125,000 more than someone who doesn't get financial literacy education at all.
Oh, wow.
Furthermore, they are much wiser in terms of their decision making. They take the time to think critically before they make an impulsive decision. And because they have the financial literacy knowledge, they're able to see economic mobility happen in their lives much sooner. So less than 1% of all the children's books are on money and saving. And then if you think about black and brown characters, less than half of 1% are black or brown protagonists on financial literacy. So it really covers a large range of different needs, and really just to highlight the importance of young people picking up books and seeing themselves in these books, and it's talking about money, something that is going to be inevitably in their life. How powerful is that? So that's one of the books. And then for educators, I have a book that's coming out here shortly called Thrive: How to Break Free from Survival Mode in Education. This is a collection of stories between me and other teachers that we talk about the grind, the hustle, the struggle of what it means to be a classroom teacher. I share a story about my early struggles, my struggles where I was not an effective teacher, and in fact was such a ineffective teacher that I needed help to become an effective teacher, from the administrators, from classroom teachers, from those that I cared about. And as I developed this framework called the Crazy Framework, which I continuously help with early career educators and even veteran educators to this day, to build connections in the classroom, build effective routines, and all the other great things that come along with it, building up student voices and being able to use data to inform practice and going after achievement, all these things that are just part of the cycle of teaching and learning in our school communities. I really talk about how I learned how to do these things in real time.
And so many of us need that inspiration throughout our entire careers from beginning to end. Because I always kind of make that joke that, a long teaching career is kind of like a marriage, right? There's going to be bumps along the way. There's going to be good years, bad years, awful years, years where you're running towards and years where you're running away. But, we all need those pick me ups from time to time. I just keep thinking about this financial literacy and the civic responsibility. Like, you just really got me on that language, the civil right, the civic responsibility. I mean, this country does a phenomenal job showing you all the things you can want, right? And we drive that want, like, look at all these shiny things and you can have all these things in America, live the American dream and get all your wants, right? And if we
Absolutely.
don't teach children and our future citizens how to make strategic decisions about getting the wealth in order to fulfill that want list, how easy it is to turn to these ideas like quick money making schemes that could potentially get you in trouble with the law, with your family, but also things like short term wins like gambling, crime, even just like over reliance on credit cards and like this lending process, because we're chasing this dream, this American dream. And so really, I've just been thinking through this whole conversation. If we are saying financial literacy is a civil right and a civic responsibility, we're almost like saving our community from these negative paths, right? And we're helping them achieve that American dream in a way that is healthy and responsible and going to potentially give them success, right?
And I appreciate this comment here, because as I analyze financial literacy, a lot of this knowledge has just been gate kept away from many communities for a long period of time. And one of the early lessons I actually go through is the racial discrimination of finance. When we talk about like those that were enslaved in this country, we really talk a lot about it from the moral aspect, the emotional aspect. We zoom in on the economics. That it was used as like the most lucrative thing in America. Like, it's built up from an economic perspective by holding people down. And then later, when we started to have banks, black owned banks, we didn't have the trustees that were available that made sure that those black owned banks maintained itself. And so those funds became lost. And then as we continue to investigate into the 1900s, like the Black Wall Street, we were
Yeah.
thriving. And then all of a sudden those those tools were gone. And so, and then it impacted us after World War II with, the suburbia and not having access to be able to purchase homes and the redlining and being able to block us from being able to build that generational wealth. So we're already operating generations behind. So we have to do, generational type work today by education and then being able to put this into practice because other people are benefiting and they've been benefited for a long time and they've had the financial literacy knowledge inside of their home
Yeah.
that might also been taught at school, but it's been taught at home how to
Rein-
build. It's been reinforced and reinforced. And so this whole conversation, it's really to awaken our eyes to like how this thing of racial discrimination in finance has impacted us for generations, for decades and centuries even. And then what we need to be able to start doing today. That's where the civic responsibility to awaken our eyes to understand this stuff at the adult and the student level so economic mobility and financial literacy could take place simultaneously. And that way we could support our kids.
Absolutely. And while Black communities have been hit definitely very hard, probably the hardest amongst all the racial groups in America, this is not just a Black brown conversation, right? Women, gender discrimination, women weren't allowed to have credit cards. I mean, there's so many things with our glass ceilings, our bamboo ceilings. I mean, there's been so much discrimination and so much protection of wealth in certain communities and exclusion in others. Wow, this
I
is
was
just such a
surprised
powerful
that
conversation.
oh yeah, I was surprised to even learn that like women weren't even able to open their own checking accounts till like just a
No,
few decades ago. When you study this stuff, you're like, wow. And then two, like, all right, we have to write a new story. And then the first comes with the education. And then after the education comes the action. And that's justice work right there to
yeah,
do that.
100%.
So
Well,
yeah.
I've been super excited about this conversation. I think you've shared some really profound thoughts today with us and so much to think about as an educator in what lessons we want to prioritize in our classroom. We know we need to talk about certain things when it comes to social justice. We know we need to talk about things when it comes to being a good community member. We know we need to wrap those social emotional skills in, but this gives us another lens of the financial literacy. And when we do that, we are equity leaders in our classrooms when we bring those financial literacy lessons to our students. I've had this dream, like every single person I talk to, I'm like, oh my God, wouldn't it be amazing if we started a school together? And so this has been my season 2 question, final question for everybody. If you were building a school from the ground up or redesigning the experience of school, or maybe if you want to rewrite like one rule or norm that we have in school, our schools really haven't changed that much in the last 100 years. What would be your disrupting thing that you would add to our educational experience or thing that you would change about school?
I think today in a world where we are still in debt predominantly. We are still in a space today where financial literacy education is, even though it's required in about 70% of the country, most young folks are still not learning about financial literacy, or they have a very minimum experience of it with just one class. We need to have financial literacy education as part of the schooling experience, the education experience. I believe it needs to happen as early as kindergarten through the grades. And here's a few reasons, real quick. Number one, it reinforces literacy. We're able to build financial literacy to be part of the math curriculum and being able to have problems that you're solving and be able to defend your problems with mathematical reasoning. And then there is the life conversation. There's been conversations over the years about we want to teach the whole child. We want to support their being and their becoming, all these different things. Well, if that's truly the case, then financial literacy education is a marker towards that. It helps for families and for communities to know that their children are also engaged in a life skill that's going to follow them the next 60, 70, 80 years of their lives. We're going to make sure that these young folks, when they have this financial literacy education that's related to a real world experience, so that way we can begin this, this true liberation, this true economic mobility liberation. but now giving kids the tools that they need to make wise decisions about college, career, citizenship engagement, begin to be civically engaged, and begin this process of being an informed consumer in society where they can make decisions that's not reoccurring debt, but it's moving towards wealth and generational wealth. Schools, I think, should have some sort of financial literacy education. And the radical part is it requires us to be able to empower educators to be able to be those teachers. So that means that we also got to make sure that we're going back into the educators. Them too need to make sure that they have financial literacy education
100%.
because a lot of us are also going through the day to day, the check to check, and we deserve better than that.
100%.
And we deserve to have that knowledge. And so we deserve to get that, and we deserve to be able to share with the kids the same knowledge that we're getting in real time.
Yeah, definitely. And, what a great skill to share with our students. I mean, really, Deshaun, for everything that you are doing with all these students that you're empowering through financial literacy, curriculum that you've designed, the presentations that you do, the speeches that you give, the books that you've written, the articles that you've written. You are 100% an equity teacher leader. I have just really enjoyed this conversation today. Money is such a motivating topic for everybody. And so I'm sure we're going to get some great feedback from this episode, and definitely will want to share your information in the show notes so that people can get a hold of you and can learn more about Changemakers and find your book and all those great things. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate it. It's such a blast to be with you today and just sharing this conversation. It's powerful.
Yeah.